Welcome to the BookBlast Book Club at Hatchards. This evening we are discussing Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix, translated by Helen Stevenson, shortlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2025. It is a stark, tragic, beautifully written novel which confronts the moral bankruptcy and paralysis of Western humanism and liberalism in the face of one of the great humanitarian crises of our time. Set against the backdrop of desperate migrants attempting to cross the English Channel from France, the novel challenges the indifference and collective responsibility of France and the United Kingdom, squabbling over who is responsible, while lives continue to be lost, drowned in the middle of the English Channel.
So the way the incident unfolded, in case you haven't read it, is that this boat got into the water with about 30 people in. It was in November in 2021, and the people in the boat were a mixture of Iraqi Kurds and Ethiopians and Somalians. One person from Vietnam, so quite a mixture of people who'd been in Calais for a while and got into a boat. And the boat got into trouble midway between France and England. The contention is, and it's corroborated by transcripts of the phone calls that took place between the boat and the Coast Guard woman who was on duty, that the French failed to send rescue. Her contention was that, she phoned the British. It was the British side. And they said, no, they're in French water.
This particular incident, because it unfortunately, horribly, happens quite a lot. So it's interesting, when you spoke to the author, when you were working on the translation, what was it about? It was this particular incident. It was so obviously,
I think it was
grim that each side was playing the bureaucratic sort of. It's your fault,
the transcripts had been published in Le Monde, so
these
conversations had taken place, and the transcript was published in the French newspaper, and the public was so horrified by the tone of the woman receiving the calls and giving them instructions or failing to, giving them reassurance or failing to, that it became a sort of public scandal in France. And some of the things she said were so striking that Vincent Delecroix, who is actually the director of the philosophy of religion at one of the universities of Paris, but also a novelist, he was so struck by these single phrases that she uttered that he decided to construct a philosophical novel around them. So the two phrases that particularly struck him, and I think struck a lot of people in the French press, were the opening phrase of the book, which is when she says, "I didn't ask you to leave." In other words, you chose to be in this situation, so don't get antsy with me. And the closing one, where she says, as they're almost all drowned and this one boy is left holding his phone above the water, she says, "You're not listening to me, you will not be saved." And the accusation was that she was callous, that she was inhuman. She wasn't just negligent and failed to do her job, she was callous. And so the whole question of voice and attitude, and to what degree a public employee, which she was, whose job is to send rescue, is also required to be a human being and to have empathy. And her way of seeing it is, I think that precisely she's required not to have empathy, that she can't do her job if she's constantly thinking who these people are and what their situation is, that she's just there to organise the rescue. The final phrase, "you will not be saved," the author used as a prompt in a way to say they won't be saved, and neither will we if we fail to respond to the distress of people in this situation. So the book is kind of bookmarked by these two extraordinary phrases, and they were the prompt for him to write what's kind of, it's not really a meditation because it's much faster and more urgent than that would suggest. And he imagines her state of mind while she's been stepped down for her job, and she's got all these thoughts about personal responsibility and guilt, and where responsibility for the migrant crisis lies, not just for the crisis, but for the individual lives.
Well, there is a collective, I mean, that's where also reading it, there's a collective, there's a feeling of all of us, is she the end? There's that thing about her being the end of the chain, that they are human beings with stories and families, and the dehumanisation. And you really feel that with this, the drowning in the middle, the three-part. So, I mean, I think you really feel that.
So her process, her journey, if you like, through the book is from one of indignation that why should she carry the can for everybody? And she was precisely the person who was doing what needs to be done. And even if she failed to in that instance for whatever reason, she was actually there doing it while the rest of us were at home. To one where it gradually dawns on her that, like the rest of us, but possibly to no greater extent, as arguable, she has a moral responsibility to care about this. And I think as a novelist, he's saying, until we are prepared to engage in an act of imagination, which is what happens in the central passage of the book, we are not able to go beyond empathy to a position where empathy actually entails an admission of responsibility. So that, I think, is the moral journey that this woman goes on, and we as readers go on with her. And the middle passage, so he said as a writer, and I only got to ask him these questions quite a long time after the book had been published. He said that the French reading public and press had sort of said, what gives you the right to write about migrants? You know, you're a white male intellectual. And he said, well, I wasn't actually writing about migrants or from their point of view. I was writing from as close as I could get to, you know, on the shoreline, all of us watching this unfold, all of us saying, actually, it's not our problem, it's yours, whichever side of the water we're on. That was as close as he could get by impersonating and getting inside the head of this woman in the form of a fictionalized monologue. That point on the water is the darkest place in the middle of the channel, is where there are no cameras and we don't see it, and it's the invisible, unimaginable
But he
place.
writes it very beautifully.
So in the middle section, what he sort of dares to do, although it's done in a very as detached and impersonalized way as possible, he describes in the third person what happened to them, and it's very kind of forensic in its actual baldness and refusal to be emotional. It becomes really, really emotional, actually, paradoxically. And once you've read that section, you can no longer, and she can no longer, the narrator, as she resumes the voice in the third section, adopt the position of, well, you know, it wasn't really my fault. I don't know why you're accusing me. The chain of responsibility is so long. At least I was there. I'm not really required to have a moral position on this. I'm just doing what. All that falls apart. Because once you've imagined it, you can't say that anymore.
The
Thoughts
end
and questions?
Is it after she's been to the police or before she's been?
It's really difficult to say. I think, because I think that it's possible to read the first part as something that entirely happens in her head.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because a lot of it is quite dreamlike. She drifts off. So she imagines herself being having turned herself in and gone to say, I was the person, I failed to do that, or even to defend herself. And you get the impression during the first half, third, that maybe she's imagining what would happen if she did, because the police interrogator who she faces across the desk is uncannily like herself.
Oh, yes,
so it's sort of her alter ego. I think it's possible to read it as her alter ego and her conscience, because in a way our conscience is our alter ego interrogating us about whether we're really sure that we feel what we think we feel. And in the third part, she's accusing herself, or she's accepting the unbearability of her responsibility. Because I was thinking about this yesterday. I was thinking, actually, to be accused of an act of negligence, say manslaughter, imagine you're accused of that, and you wake up the next morning and you think, I did that, and I didn't even realise I was. It's not like being accused of murder.
And it's 27 people as well. It's not just one person.
There was some intention.
27 people.
And I think that's a terrible thing to live with. And it's interesting, when I talked to Vincent about it, he said that when he first read the newspaper reports, he thought, who is this monstrous woman who said these things? And I was a bit taken aback, because I thought when I first read it, I didn't think she was monstrous. I thought, God, imagine having that responsibility, and through some inexplicable moment or even hour, I don't know, of inattention, which was probably shared with quite a lot of other people, she became this monster in the eyes of the world. And what a dreadful thing to have to live with, and almost that would be enough in itself.
I mean, there's a feeling also that she's trained. There is sometimes a feeling when you you're trained to not feel.
Yeah, and
they have their script. This is what you do. It's almost like a horse with blinkers. Ignore everything else. Ignore the humanity of it.
Her script
you see?
was to send a boat out.
Exactly.
So why did she ignore the script?
Yeah.
She sent several boats.
She sent several boats. Yeah.
She claimed that she called the British, and the British said yes.
And the British said, and then there's this ping pong between who.
So whether it was confusion.
Whether they were in French waters or in...
Well, boats,
exactly.
there is a moment, I guess, when you cross the
cross
line.
over.
But it's actually quite a fluid line because you're in the middle of a body of water.
The sea,
why does it matter? If people are drowning, why does it matter?
Who is exactly? Well, exactly. That's the question. Why does it matter whether you're French or English? If they're drowning, help them.
I think it's a different. It's a question of whether she was incompetent, negligent, or inhuman. We are all implicated in negligence.
Well, that's the thing.
And we're all implicated in that moment where you just say, this is too much, I can't take it all on. And I think that there is also, I don't know if you saw the reports in the newspapers last week of the Cranston inquiry into this incident. The British responsibility, and there's an equivalent inquiry in France. And the findings of the Cranston report. But one thing that struck me about it was incredibly compassionate. It had the relatives of all the people in the boat just talk about who their family members were. He just took time for these stories to be amplified. And it was so human. I hadn't expected that. I thought it would be very objective and very dry, and it wasn't. And I was so moved by that. The finding was that the failures were mostly to do with underfunding, understaffing, people working too long shifts, people being absolutely exhausted, the repetitive nature of the calls, the fact that the people in the boats, because they were so frightened and desperate, although many of them had done it before, it wasn't their first attempt, they had a tendency to call repeatedly, and so the Coast Guards would say, just call me once, give me your location, and I will send someone as soon as I can. But if somebody's in panic, they call several times from several phones, and then you get 3 different phones and you think, are they in the same boat? Are we trying to find 3 boats here, or 6, or 1?
I do find it quite interesting how, I guess one of the things that the book says, to empathise properly, these are individual people, but then on the other side, like when she's is defending herself, like, I'm a very small peg, like at the end of this chain. It's not really comparing apples to apples, if that makes sense.
I think what the author's saying is that we are all individuals, and we all bear some measure of responsibility, whether we put ourselves in the front line or not, and get paid for it.
Does try to humanise her by introducing us to her daughters, her personal circumstances, which are really difficult. Like, she is humanised, I think.
Well, she's humanised because she's human.
Well, she's human, exactly.
I mean, she's not painted as this evil, monstrous person. She is painted as somebody.
To me, what fiction does, so it takes the big waves of history or social thing, and it says, remember that these things happen inside individuals. The book isn't really setting out to say, whose side are you on? Was she good? Was she bad? It's asking you to imagine that actually that could be anybody.
She mentions walking past somebody on the street. And we do that in London multiple times a day.
There is a moment when she says, though, that empathy is the luxury of people who stand on the shore and do nothing. So she sees herself as an active participant.
Well, there's also that thing about people staying silent and doing nothing. You are actually part of the problem. I mean, you are... What was all that thing to do with...
Everybody's complicit in some
You're
way.
complicit. That doing nothing is actually... Exactly, you're complicit. There was something I didn't want to see, or rather recognise, pointing to the big blue file lying on the desk in which the elements of the inquiry were accumulating. In other words, pointing to the whole story, she repeated, you can't see the harm in all this. The question had a bizarre ring to it, as if she was reproaching me for not attending closely enough, or having poor eyesight, or not having a good pair of binoculars to see the harm with. Usually I am the one with the binoculars, or so to speak. My microphone is a pair of binoculars, my geolocation screen is a pair of binoculars. So it's the seeing... I don't know, it's just, I could see true reality much more clearly via a telephone line and the screens than someone with it right under their nose.
If you see something happening, then your emotions come into account straight away. Whereas if it's on the screen and then through headphones or whatever, you can analyse without reacting so much with your emotions.
That's what she's saying, isn't it? I don't know if it's true for everybody but her particular state of mind, which may have been fashioned by her, it's a déformation professionnelle. It's like she's done this so many nights that you must get inured, and each boat becomes a statistic in a much bigger field of numbers. And what she's accused of, and was accused of in person by the French press, was of cracking jokes or of making light. Or so it was her tone of voice. And I think what he succeeds in doing well in the novel is rendering that tone of voice and the fluctuations of tone of voice within that monologue between throwaway jokes and self-interrogation and indignation, all those different tones which reflect the different states of mind flashing across the page. Translating it was an attempt to render that, or to follow him as he rendered it, which was demanding because she's never in a constant state for a one page. She's changing all the time.
I completely understood what the harm was, and I said, yes, I see perfectly well the harm in it. Of course I can. The harm is right in front of me. I see it every day, and especially every night, because the night is its garment, a black garment with no stars. It's right there under my nose. How could I not see it? Because the harm is the sea and the night together.
But in fact, the French says "où est le mal." I think it's the idea that the sea is primeval, that it's morally neutral, and there's that compulsion to go towards the sea, which we have as well. Or the terror of it, its ability to either transport us or annihilate us. Or, I think all that's woven into it.
This is still happening all the time. It's not just like.
And everywhere also
we're now
here,
more vigilant because we know
No.
the consequences of not paying attention or of allowing ourselves to be distracted.
I think this book has had some impact. I mean, I might say that because I translated, but since it was, it was a book at bedtime on Radio 4. It was a book that didn't do spectacularly well in France. It's done really well here from being shortlisted for the Booker International. It was then on Radio 4. I think it got to a lot of people. And somebody was saying to me in the judiciary that they felt that UK policy had changed recently. So I was talking to someone who lives at Dungeness on the Kent coast, and they said that day after day they would get people arriving in dinghies. That doesn't happen anymore. So the UK Coast Guard forces and border control and the Royal National Lifeboat, is it? They're going out much more to intercept them and steer them all into Dover, where they can be properly, you hope, welcomed and processed. That it would be more regulated, and that might, to some degree, be not unrelated to just small shifts. I think fiction can do that, and you have to believe it can do that.
Oh yes.
And literature, that it can somebody can be listening to the radio late at night on Radio 4 and think, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
And I don't take any credit for that. Maybe Pete can, but and the author. But you like to think that that's possible. Otherwise, why do we do it?
I know. I mean, I would love to think that, but with our politics swinging ever more anti-immigrant, ever more uncompassionate towards people who are.
But he is also trying. I mean, I was interested in the fact that fiction enabled Vincent Delecroix, who is like the archetypal French, in a way, ivory tower intellectual. Yes. He enters the mind of Eric, who is her husband, who is born in the Pas-de-Calais, who is fed up of the situation, as people are on the Kent coast, of the transformation of their shoreline and their towns in ways that are unrecognisable, and they're partly rendered more extreme by the neglect of the welcoming country to deal with it. But there is a transformation of those places, and Eric articulates that and expresses it and says, I was so fed up in the supermarket, and the cashiers in the supermarket are fed up of it, and everyone's fed up of it, and this is not not how we want it to be. And he's able to articulate that without himself being an extreme right-wing bigot, and fiction can do that. And you read it and you think, maybe.
Again, it is a failure, but it also shows that complete failure of leadership and politics and everything. That is just actually what you say is just getting worse and worse. They're not dealing with anything. It's almost going from bad to worse, really.
But
or maybe the people who have solutions aren't heard, or something. I don't know. It becomes one. But
in order to understand any situation, you have to see it in the round, and that means
of course.
you have to be able to see the other.
The other, absolutely.
Point of view of the person who you feel revolted by. Unless you understand that, where they're coming from, you cannot stand in your own position without somehow being complicit with a kind of, well, of course it's like this, I'm a right-thinking person. And I really believe passionately in the ability and the responsibility of fiction to do that. So that
that's the idea behind the book club, really, is we want to, even if just one or two people read, Andrei Kirchhoff about Ukraine, Andrei Delecroix, Vincent Delecroix, just a couple of people, because I know there are books that have changed my life and perception. I'm like, wow, I hadn't seen it like that. So absolutely. So it's great that this was on the radio, absolutely, that one wants more.
I'm interested in you chose the title Small Boat. In the French, is it shipwreck?
It's naufrage, oui, c'est naufrage, it's shipwreck.
So,
a small boat has a resonance
really
here.
Different meaning.
Did you choose Small Boat?
The first title we chose was Save Our Souls, SOS. And Vincent Delecroix liked that, didn't he? And we couldn't translate it as shipwreck because that has really different resonance.
That's got a very different resonance. Very good title.
She said, why don't you call it Small Boat?
It's a very good title.
And I think it's really powerful because also of the resonance with Dunkirk, so these plucky little boats that went out that got back the British soldiers and brought them back to safety, and that was the original meaning of small boats. And this is a kind of subversion of it in a way, because these are the small boats we want to push back to the French. So it had that double meaning, which I wanted to stay with Save Our Souls, and Vincent did as well, but I think it was absolutely the right choice.
No, and Small Boat is actually very good. It is also more catchy, it is small, but it's absolutely the point, and it has more resonance, really.
It may not have that kind of moral heaviness of Save Our Souls,
which might put people off, actually.
But I think in a way that's affected. In Small Boat, it becomes ironic almost, doesn't it? That it's such a huge problem, such a devastating thing to happen, and it's just a small boat.
And I was also struck by you saying the word translate actually means ferries.
Yeah, it means to ferry across, to be late is to bear or to carry across, and I felt really strongly. So I came across this book reading reviews in the French press and thought, well, that sounds really interesting. I haven't read a work of fiction about that subject, and rang the publisher Gallimard and said, has anybody offered for the rights for this? And they said no. It's surprising. And I said, well, I really want to translate it. So I translated a small sample, the first 10, 20 pages, and was really keen to get it published here, and thankfully Pete undertook to publish it. But some quite big publishers didn't want to publish it. I felt that unless this book, actually one of my daughters said this to me, she said, unless this book actually exists in French and English, it won't have made its journey properly, and you can carry it across the water.
Because my daughter recommended it to me as well. I mean, I think it's a book that's appealed to people of different generations. I think it's got really broad appeal. I'm surprised that you said it didn't do so well in France.
And I went into a bookshop in the middle of Paris, was it last summer, I think, and I wanted to buy a copy of Naufrage, of the French, for the people I was staying with. And I said, I'm looking for this book, and I said, I'm the English translator of it, and it's done really well in the UK, and it's going to be published in America. And I said, you don't seem to have a copy of it. I was really surprised. And he said, yes, it's not a book we've particularly supported. And he sounded so smug, and I was really, well, that's really silly of you, actually. But apparently it did get longlisted for the Goncourt, I think, in France, but it didn't do that well, and I think it was partly because raising the possibility that the French had failed in there. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? And maybe the English really liked it because it makes it look like the French would screw up. I don't know. But that English-French
it's the old we know that one, the Franco-British such issue.
And you probably found, as a translator, you're often negotiating that. What does Jeremy call it?
Passing the buck to
porous margin between between France and Sweden.
Interesting that the book says it's not a book we particularly supported. It's almost taking a moral stance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very...
because when it was serialised on Radio 4, I think it reached a huge public, because so many people have recommended it to me. I've had lots and lots of people.
Yeah, I think it has reached.
Do you think that when it's serialised on the radio...
Oh, that's huge. That's important.
Does it kill the sales or does it promote them?
It promotes them.
Before I just bought the book from people's recommendations.
So it would probably work, even though some people will say, well, I don't need to buy it.
Oh, no, the radio, getting on the radio is crucial. Oh no, that's huge. It's terribly important to get on the radio. It doesn't kill the sales. It boosts the sales.
Personally to read a book than to listen to a...
Yeah.
It's a little bit over-determining, isn't it, to hear somebody's voice?
I think I did try to read it. I listened to it. I think I tried for 10 minutes and then I just thought, no, I'll buy the book.
But audiobooks are huge. Huge. They are huge audiobooks.
I don't particularly like the person's voice.
Yeah, and I was very aware translating it of the question of pace, and it kind of just hurtling along through her mind. And the oddity about translating is you're focused on one single sentence or a word or a phrase, and you stop at it and you puzzle over it for, sometimes it just goes immediately, and sometimes it takes you 20 minutes to think, how am I going to do this, or longer. And so your pace is very different while you're working on it to how it is when you read it again. So that stop-start thing when you're translating can get in the way of your understanding the forward thrust and the pace of the book, so you have to go back and then whoosh through it again, as though you were reading it, and then say, where are the moments.
Would you read aloud? Because I know some people, that's the classic one.
I read aloud in my head.
In your head, but sometimes people actually do read aloud. Flaubert, that's a famous Flaubert, isn't it, with his Gaulois. He read all his stuff aloud.
And particularly
rhythm, but I mean, I know people who do that. So it's anyway.
I mean, to the extent this is a kind of oral narration, it's as though she was speaking it out loud. So it's probably more necessary to hear it and the voice in your head than it would be with a third person.
In the interview with Dua Lipa, the author said that the section in which he described the actual sinking of the boat, he was really traumatized. It was the hardest part of the book to write. And he was really affected by it, and it kind of, made him very anxious and made him.
And I think having met him, I didn't know him very well, but having met him, I'd say he's an incredibly sensitive person. Even though he writes philosophy, his ability to imagine and to feel for and with is quite unusual, and to find language to fit that. And I really admire his ability. And I was looking at the book again this weekend, not having picked it up for a while, and thinking what an extraordinary achievement it is to be so capable of entering all the states of mind of another person and not to lose them on the way, but to stay right with them, because he's not looking at her. And that the middle section, the fact that he found that it's interesting, isn't it? Because you might say that was the easiest bit, because I was dispassionate and cold,
hardest bit.
And the harder bit was the imagining, but somehow that colder, dispassionate, more journalistic account was for him tougher than the bit of actually inhabiting the person's mind.
But isn't the real culpability and the real responsibility here with the traffickers who put 30 odd people in a mine?
That's a good point. Traffic.
His boat's going out in the dead of winter. People.
I don't think anybody doesn't agree with you that. I just would make a very interesting book.
She picked on. I agree, she's behaved sadly in an almost inappropriate way, perhaps in a, I don't like to use the word immature way, maybe in a selfish
thoughtless, absolutely thought. It's just completely, because I was thinking it's like everyone's in their bubble. That one feels very much in the world today. There are people, they're in their bubble and they can't, unless it's happened to them, they can't imagine it or back to the imagination.
But it's the starting point of the novel. The starting point, you're in the water. It's not about the traffickers.
No, that's true. But the traffickers, it's an interesting point. The traffickers, there is something a lot to be said. But for this book, no.
It's good that it left them out, because it would have been completely different.
Well, I think that you have to remember it's a work of literature. It's a tragedy. Tragedies are written not about the extreme villains, and they're not really written about the victims. They're written about the person in the middle,
the humans who's
who caught and doesn't know what to do. And that's what makes a tragedy, and that's why it stays in our minds. And so the great Shakespearean tragic characters are the people who are in doubt and unsure and feel guilt and hope and all those complex emotions. So it's true that the people smugglers are obviously the people most. It's easiest and probably most right to pin the blame on them, although they too are part of a series of financial transactions and social transactions which might lead them that we don't know. But it wouldn't make a work of literature unless we were on that fragile point where somebody is both innocent and guilty and is profoundly human. I think that's what makes it a work of literature. He chose to make the narrator that person because it meant that they could hold many complex thoughts in their head at the same time.
Personally, I think it's good that it was quite a sort of focused book and a very concise book, that there weren't too many characters.
Or the other
surrounding
context.
Because we entered into the mind of the woman, and so I
but also it's the end point.
That's one of the strengths.
I wanted to actually flag up. This is almost like a duo. This has just been published by Hope Road, another of Pete's books. Venice Requiem, again, bystanders watching. Pate Sabali, a 22-year-old Gambian, plunges to death in Venice's beautiful Grand Canal. So it's a many-layered look again at European morality and culture. So the author brings him to life. So it's in memory of Africans who have died far from their homelands, shrouded in silence and oblivion. So again, this sort of onlookers watching him. He just kills himself. And there's something very heartbreaking about, of course, of the backpack. Anyway, but so this has just been published last week. Right. So this in a different, but they're sort of different, but they're twins. Okay. Again, there's somehow everyone just watches. Again, right. Pete, you because you were the author was here last week, so you want to talk just a minute or two just about this?
Well, just that it's a complete mystery as to why he goes to Venice and drowns, because he's a resident. He has he's allowed to be in Italy, and he's been there for a couple of years. So it's trying to fathom his behaviour, and also the onlookers and their response.
Well, again,
And the kind of central part of Venice in European culture, literary culture as well.
So it's based equally on a true story.
It's based on a true story.
Again. Any last questions for Helen and for Pete?
Specific difficulties with translating this?
I found pitching in really difficult. And suddenly you're in midstream, you're in mid-flow, her voice is on the page. I found that quite difficult because you're trying to, there is no indication. She says at one point, I came here to hear my own voice on the recordings, and she's imagining herself in the police station, and I haven't heard her voice, although I think possibly Vincent had. I never heard her voice, so I didn't really know what she sounded like, and I found that, because she has quite a complicated way of talking, and partly philosophical, partly personal, and as I say, her tone of voice changes a lot during the book, so I found that difficult. I found it really emotionally difficult in a way that I haven't found a book ever before. And I found it really difficult revisiting it. And around the Booker thing, I found the way that it was talked about and the competitive nature of the prize, all that, I found that really difficult because I'd been so inside it and felt so strongly about the importance of it that I found that whole context hard. The other element that was difficult from the point of view of translation was because he's a philosopher, so he's constantly using words like le mal, le bien, and he'll say things like à quoi bon, which means why bother, why bother fishing them out of the water, but actually it's a philosophical question about good and evil. So to keep the philosophical nature of those very common words apparent without actually labouring it too strongly, that was another thing. So, translations are always both difficult and easy. So it's easy because you think, I just got, and it kind of flows through you like a piece of music. But it's always difficult to get it actually right and to get it smooth, to get over ironing out and ironing out. You know. But the whole argument about AI and that it can now give really immaculate apparently translations of things. As a translator, one of your roles is in a way to keep the creases in and the mistake, not quite mistakes, but the things that only you would have chosen to say it that way.
Well, also it's the word choice. I mean, there are many ways. I mean, that's when there are translation workshops. You will take a paragraph, and 5 different people will translate the paragraph in 5 different ways, and how they will choose the word and what's behind it, and how they try and see maybe what is the author meaning or the. So actually, that is where I'm afraid AI. Fine, it might on the surface produce a translation, but actually if you start looking at it, there is something a bit flat, and there's something slightly bizarre because it's sort of right but not. It's like, when you put on a pair of glasses and you kind of see, but it's a bit squiffity somewhere. It doesn't quite work.
Sure. Well, yes.
So it's like, whoa. It doesn't.
I will never have idiosyncrasies.
No, exactly. That's the thing.
Idiosyncrasies. Yeah, that's the reason.
It's like a building, an old building that you can hear creaking in the night.
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's something really lovely and characterful about that. And that's always the difficulty of translation, of knowing that you're going to have to be 100% accurate, but maintain that. The 2 levels of that. And the more I do, the more I realise that as well.
It's interesting you're saying, I know you're a philosopher of religion, because you could actually see this as a work. It's a work, almost a work of moral philosophy.
It is. It's about who is saved.
It is actually. It's true.
Whom.
Who saves who? Yeah, and who's responsible.
And has he written other novels as well?
He has written other books. Actually, I looked. He has written other.
None of them's been
translated. This is the only thing that's been translated.
It's interesting that the word to save, which comes back a lot in the French, sauver, in English we'd more usually say rescue, but somehow it didn't seem right to use rescue because it was more of a moral issue.
Save,
save more often.
Yeah, there we are, back to word choice. So what would
and knowing who has written the book.
Exactly, that's true.
Otherwise you would not choose save over rescue.
And a Frenchman would not choose the term small boat because it means nothing to a French person.
But thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this BookBlast Book Club episode. We've been discussing Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix with translator Helen Stevenson. Join us in person on the second Monday of every month at Hatchards Piccadilly. We'd love to see you and raise a glass to fine literature in translation. Meantime, you can pick up a copy of Small Boat or any other book club pick from the BookBlast shop online at bookshop.org.